No.
Hi, and welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Neil Bradley, my co-host Joe Quinn.
Hi there.
You're listening to the Salt Radio Network. I believe you're also viewing it, some of you for the first time. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We are going to be talking this week about, well, the last week's craziness. It's kind of a weekly affair now. Something happens, something major. We have a stream of events that took place in the Middle East, a string of events, rather. I think they need some explaining because
There's a lot of misconceptions out there.
a lot of misconceptions. You know, it's not just in the mainstream, which obviously lies.
It's always misconceived by them on
It's
purpose.
always, but even in the alternative, the people who are, you know, smart and they're watching closely, like us, they're still not getting a lot of things.
They're
you
not
know?
really thinking about it.
No.
They're thinking too
Well,
emotionally, let's say.
they're thinking about it, but they have their beliefs about
Right.
how it's supposed to happen,
Right.
and then it doesn't manifest the
Right.
way they thought it was going to, and then they go
Right.
and they throw all the papers up in the air. I will confess, though, I did a bit of that myself last week because I did not understand how the sequence of events we're going to discuss happened. Thankfully, Joe here came in and said, Neil, he got the fish here and he hit me across the head with it.
Yeah.
And he said, you're not thinking. And then
The fish sorts everything out.
and then
Makes everything better.
I saw the light. So yeah, it's kind of like a similar situation to what happened a month ago, I suppose, with what we called the Focus airstrikes in Syria.
Kind of like a follow-up.
A follow-up. Right, okay. You're going to
Like-
explain why it's a follow-up.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you about that, but let me just give first a brief timeline so you have the sequence of what happened in your head. On Tuesday, Trump announces,
Right.
we're pulling out of the Iran deal. Iran is a no deal.
And we more or less got a heads up about
Yeah.
that was going to happen when Merkel and Macron went over and had a visit, and through Merkel being very pessimistic, let's say, about it, and making it pretty clear in her 20-minute speech to the press, basically, that was the only thing she did when she was there in her 3-hour trip. She pretty much made it clear. Well, she talked about, well, the president will President Trump will let you know what's going to happen as far as the Iran deal goes on May 12th or whatever. And she said, but it's clear to us, Germany, that we need to, we can no longer look to America for kind of to protect us or for leadership or to follow America's lead, and we've done that since after the Second World War. But now that's all gone. I mean, that right there made it very clear that Trump was going to back out of the Iran deal. That he had conveyed that to her. You know, Trump afterwards talking to the camera saying, "Well, you're going to find out." And I'm like, Merkel just told us, you idiot, Jesus Christ. And then of course Macron before her, the way he was sucking up and pleading to Congress. You know, you could sum up Macron's speech to Congress a few weeks ago there as, "Please don't leave us. We're no good on our own." That's pretty much what he said among the kisses and the sucking, face sucking and stuff that was going on. So anyway, yeah. Right. So
Tuesday
the Iran deal.
is a big
he
announcement.
backed out of the Iran deal on May 12th.
Yeah.
Officially.
Tuesday is a big announcement. The same day, Israel sends up red flags by issuing a warning to any of its citizens in the Golan Heights to be prepared to drop into bomb shelters at a moment's notice. That's Tuesday.
Right.
Wednesday is Victory Day in Russia. That's when Netanyahu's in Russia as guest of honor at the Victory Parade, and then has a one-on-one meeting with Putin apparently that same day.
Right.
Thursday then, early morning,
right,
between 1 and 3 in the morning,
right,
local time, the Israelis supposedly respond to attacks coming from Iranian forces on the Golden Heights from inside Syria, and that's when they launched their 60-some missiles, mostly from fighter jets. That's the rough sequence of events. But of course, what if any connection? What is the direct connection between them? The timing, of course, Israel's timing of what it does is always stands out because it always seems to happen close to other major things, and you do have to wonder what it is. So, is there any connection between Trump making the announcement that everyone knew he was going to make anyway
Yeah.
on the Tuesday, and then 24, 36 hours later doing this in Syria?
Yeah. It's kind of like someone, one person calling another person a very bad person, and then their friend. So you have two people standing in front of one person. One of them says to the one person, he tells everybody, he's a very bad person. And then the other one slaps him in the face. Just to basically make the point. You see, I mean, why would I slap him in the face if he wasn't a bad person? So basically, the so-called or the Israeli attack on quote unquote Iranian targets in Syria was just big upping, if that's, can I use that as a verb?
Mhm.
It was that was Israel big upping Trump's backing out of the Iran deal, i.e., it's just to give it a bit of extra legs, that kind of thing.
It struck me as evidence provided by the Israelis of Trump's whole preamble to
Right,
his talk, which
right.
was Iran, very
Blah blah
bad,
blah.
terrorists, very bad, very bad. So Israel goes, okay, we'll just punch Iran in the face
Right,
in Syria,
right.
and then Iran will respond, and then look,
Yeah.
Trump's right, very
Right,
bad.
right. It was also, yeah, so that's pretty much what it was. It was pretty transparent that that's what was going on. So we've every reason to disbelieve the Israeli claim that they were attacked by the Iranians, that Iranian missiles or rockets or whatever were fired into the Golan Heights. There's no real evidence for that. Um, and Iran has denied that it did that. And that falls into the category of Assad gassing his own people on any number of occasions that you want to, like, for example, when the UN weapons inspectors are coming in, he gasses people that day. I think that was in 2013 in Ghouta, the day that the UN weapons inspectors were coming in to check if Assad had been using chemical weapons. He decided to use chemical weapons because he's an idiot. So obviously he didn't. That's called a provocation. And also, so there was absolutely no reason for Iran in the current geopolitical climate and the stuff that's happened over the past few years for Iran to unilaterally fire some missiles at the Golan Heights the other night. Obviously, just didn't happen, basically. But of course, it serves as a pretext for Israel to carry out its obviously pre-planned, well in advance attack on Syria at night, with mainly using Israeli jets and targeting. If you, the Israelis provided this little map of all these little explosion areas across mostly western Syria, around Damascus and north towards Homs and that area. Um, there was maybe 30 or 40. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed more or less roughly the same number. You're not going to get an exact number, but more or less the same. There was a large number, significant number, several dozen strikes or targets were hit or attempted to be hit on that night. And so the Israeli narrative was we were hitting Iranian targets in Syria. First of all, it's unlikely that Israel would know what an Iranian target is in Syria, or what constitutes an Iranian target. What we do know, what they did admit, apart from saying using the vague Iranian targets, they said that they also hit 5 Syrian air defense systems. And the reason they did that was because, well, we're attacking Iran, but we had to attack these 5 Syrian air defense systems because they fired at our warplanes.
They got in the way of our humanitarian bombing.
Well, they officially said they fired at us, which Israel always only responds to attacks, right?
Of course.
It's only defending itself. So the Syrian air defense systems, according to Israel, fired at them. But that sounds implausible. Sounds like nonsense. Because the Israelis are smart enough to know, and based on the way they carried out this attack, it happened using mainly Israeli jets flying at high altitude. Some of them, many of them even, maybe barely left Israeli airspace, or only briefly went into Syrian airspace. And the Syrian air defense systems that were targeted, 5 of them, according to Israel, are not equipped. They're not type of systems that are designed to shoot down airplanes. They're designed for low altitude things like Tomahawk cruise missiles. That's what they're designed for shooting at them. Specifically, we're talking here about the Panzer S1 or SA-22 system, and it's a fairly new system developed by Russia, given to the Syrians over the past few years, specifically to repel kind of Tomahawk cruise missile and low altitude missile attacks. And it was those systems, among others, that were used to shoot down about 70% of the Focus, France, UK, and US Tomahawk cruise missile attack, about 100 cruise missiles last month. And all of the evidence suggests a good number, at least 70% of those were shot down by these systems. Now, it was these systems that were targeted by Israel 1 month later, i.e., the other night on May 12th, May 13th. So that's why it seems more likely that this it was a propaganda.
It's a connected operation.
Yeah, there was a propaganda point or goal being achieved, which was claiming that Iran attacked us and we were attacking Iran in Syria, i.e., Iran's in Syria, Iran's evil. At the same time as Trump backs out of the Iran deal. And the other aspect was to retaliate against those Russian delivered Syrian anti-missile systems, Panzer S-1, and other older Soviet systems that the Russians had retooled or upgraded over the past few years, to retaliate against those because they were the ones that shot down all of Fukus's missiles last month. So it kind of like it was an attempt to, well, it was payback basically. I mean, these people are pretty petty in that respect, and it was payback against that because, I mean, while nothing was said at the time, I wrote an article about it, and there was a lot of talk about all those missiles being shot down, and that was a real kind of slap in the face, talking about fish slapping people in the faces. That was a big fish slap in the face of the Americans, the French, the British, and particularly the Americans who directed the Tomahawk cruise missile attack to have 70% of the missiles shot down. And they know that 70% of their missiles were shot down. They don't like that fact. They like to keep open the possibility of firing a bunch of Tomahawk cruise missiles at any time they want, at any country they want, and them having an effect, having the desired effect. But they didn't have the desired effect last month. So Israel, which is more or less joined at the hip with the U.S. military. I mean, the Israeli military in Israel is, to a large extent, the U.S. military. There's all sorts of advisors and planners embedded with the Israeli military. All of their weapons are supplied by the U.S. It's basically an American outpost. Israel is an American outpost in the Middle East. So this was effectively a U.S. military operation in conjunction with Israeli U.S. against the systems in Syria that shot down America's Tomahawk cruise missiles last month, while at the same time giving more legs to the idea, a propaganda offensive about the evils of Iran in Syria.
The claims were huge. I mean, Trump style huge. The claims were so successful. It was the Israeli media is gushing about it, and Defense Minister Lieberman said he qualified it, which is not like him, but still, it was a grandiose statement. He said, we've knocked out almost all of Iran's military infrastructure in Syria. But there is none, really. There's no substantial. There are Iranian personnel, there are probably Iranian proxy forces, but there is no Iranian military in Syria. That's the first lie. Okay, that's the first propaganda layer. But in the second one, in the specific of this operation, the Russians immediately said over half of them were successfully repelled.
Yeah. Which they may well have been.
It's not 70%, but it's still...
Yeah. Well, if you bring it down to 50%, they only were able to shoot down 50% of them. That's because they weren't Tomahawk cruise missiles. They were fired from Israeli jets at high altitude, although they have to obviously reach low altitude to get their targets. But it gives them a bit of an edge, and also it was a surprise attack. The last month's Tomahawk cruise missile attack by Fukus was well signaled in advance, a couple of days in advance, so the Syrians had lots of time to prepare, and everybody was manning their anti-aircraft stations, and that's why.
Well, I want to ask about that because there's a video put out by the Israeli Air Force. You picked it up, and it's included in your article, and it's the camera's apparently mounted on the head or side of the cruise missile, and it's going down to what is clearly a Panzer S-1 system. Presumably that was gone, but in the lead up to it descending, we can see guys hanging around going into the system. They haven't been operating, which exposes the lie that the small lie, the operational lie that this system had first fired on the Israelis.
One of the ones that fired on the Israelis. Yeah, it wasn't.
But also beyond that, does it not suggest? It also suggests they were surprised.
Right.
That particular crew should have been on the alert. Right.
They weren't expecting the attack. It took place over a couple of hours.
I don't understand still why they were surprised. If the Israelis had warned Golan Heights about an Iranian attack 36 hours before, the Israelis claimed, and it's plausible given that Netanyahu has just been in Moscow, that they had worked this out through a deconfliction line between Israel and Moscow beforehand. That it suggests that the Russians knew something was about to happen.
Possibly. But weren't sure. But I mean, again, that the Israelis I suppose you can't really trust Israelis, but there's obviously that's something else we need to talk about is what's going on with Putin and Netanyahu and why so many people are the expectations of many people that there's some or the belief of many people that there's something wrong there. You know what I mean? That this what is this is Putin doing a deal with the devil? You know?
Well, the scales apparently fell from some people's eyes last week, and Putin is actually a Zionist puppet.
Right. Well, there's I mean, I'll give you an example of one website that I'll just show here. It's Russia Insider, but it's actually from the Saker. It's written by the Saker, and it's the title. It's just from actually May 11th, whatever. But it sums up the reaction of many people in the alternative media anyway, about this kind of the way Russia is conducting itself with respect to Israel in the Middle East, and the expectation that Russia should be doing a lot more to handle or deal with Israel. The title of it is Russia's lack of reaction to Israel strikes on Syria is disgusting.
There's a moral connotation there that, yeah,
And
they should have done otherwise.
And the Saker says, there's no doubt in my mind that Netanyahu has just publicly thumbed his nose at Putin and that Putin took it. That's pretty much what he says. He says Russian reaction is totally disgusting. There was nothing, absolutely nothing in the way of reaction. So,
why didn't
yeah,
Putin say no, niet, and send the cavalry in?
why didn't he
smack Israel right there?
Why didn't he just deal with all the bad? Why doesn't Russia just come in and deal with all the bad guys and make the world turn the world into utopia?
Yeah,
peace and bunny rabbits and flowers and stuff. Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, you know. I mean, maybe that's a shock for people to realize that the world is a much more complicated place, and what Russia is trying to do, certainly since Putin came to power, and certainly over the past 10 years since Russia has really started to exert its influence, is to kind of overturn or change the global order, a global order that has existed for at least 70 or 80 years. And if you wanted to nitpick, you could go back, a couple of hundred years,
right.
even if you go back into the British Empire and stuff, through the establishment of the current world order we have today. Why it's a Western-dominated world? You're talking about really hundreds of years of history, and kind of a spread of influence that has began that long ago and has proceeded since then. So to overturn that or to change that, it's not simple. It's not the kind of thing we can just go in with a big stick and sort it all out. Specifically in the Middle East, in Syria. I mean, there's last year the Russians released a draft constitution for Syria, and it's very interesting reading. It talks about some form of federalization, including some form of autonomy for the Kurds. It also includes references to effectively no foreign entities or elements being allowed inside Syria, that it being a sovereign country. So it seems that Russia's vision for Syria is one where not necessarily that Assad stays, but simply that Syria, as in terms of the country that it is today, and its historic allegiance or alliance, let's say, with Russia, and with being an independent country in the Middle East, is what they want to maintain, what they want to see, and that does not necessarily, probably explicitly, does not include significant Iranian influence in Syria, which the Iranians, of course, would like to have, right? The Iranians want to have as much influence in Syria as possible. They like to have a little pathway over the Mediterranean and stuff. And of course, Hezbollah would like to have quite a lot of influence in Syria, might want Syria to have a lot of influence in Lebanon, and vice versa. But
what is this Iranian influence thing they all talk about? Is it like Iran wants to conquer and claim Syrian territory and Lebanon for itself? Obviously not. That's ridiculous.
Maybe not.
It wants to have
not explicitly
puppets in those two countries.
But it wants to have influence. And certainly, I think the point is that Russia does not think it's a good idea that Iran has that kind of an influence in Syria. So that at least should go some way to explaining why Russia and Putin aren't too worried about Israel saber rattling over the Iranian presence in Syria, and even launching the odd attack on on Iranian bases in Syria. It's also to send a message to the Syrians, because there's, after 7 years of war and stuff, and people in Syria realizing, politicians in Syria realizing that the Iranians have helped them a lot to deal with the jihadis that have overrun, the Western-backed jihadis that have overrun Syria the past 7 years. There's a lot of people, maybe a lot of feeling in Syria, amongst the political class and amongst some of the population, that Iran should have a place, you know. So it's about not only convincing Iran that it's not going to have the run of Syria, free reign, or the free run of Syria, and also that the Syrians need to kind of like realize that they can't just allow the Iranians to run all over the place either, because it's not good for the region, basically. It's not good for the Russians want to see strong, independent nation states cooperating in the Middle East, and that they can't avoid including Israel in that equation, in that future equation. The utopian vision would be a Middle East that includes Israel and all the countries that exist there today, and all of them being relatively, strong and independent as possible, and cooperating with each other to the greatest extent possible. That's the Russian plan. So you can't piss anybody off. You can't target one country as the bad guy and piss them off, especially in the case of Israel, which has a very strong military. And Israel's a bit of a wild card in the sense that you don't necessarily know
a streak that's a mile wide.
Yeah, you don't know if they wouldn't go bonkers. And that's the thing.
I think
the US Russia has expended a lot of resources over the past 2 or 3 years in consolidating its position and its ability to have this role of a kind of mediator in the region in general. It's put a lot of resources in. A lot of Russians have died as a result. It's put a lot of money and a lot of effort into doing that. And it knows that a major conflict between Iran and Israel, or Iran and Syria, would ruin all that.
Mm-hmm. It would bring it to a choice where it has to go, well, are we sending in 100,000 troops?
Right. Well, they wouldn't. They're not going to do that. Right. They want to do it the smart way, which is that limited damage.
To save what they've already invested, that's the kind of thing you'd have to do.
Right.
Should it get to the next level?
But that would be too much. That would be too much of an investment. That would be too costly. Basically, they've done a lot with very little cost, and they want to preserve that. And the only way you can preserve that is having a good relationship with Israel. You can't piss Israel off. Basically, you have to.
I think your explanation there I think you just explained the clash between a Russian view and an assumption that a lot in the left and the independent media would have, which is that everyone hates Israel, and they don't say it because no one wants to say it, but they do. They want Israel gone. They maybe want a Palestine. Those Israelis who are there, they can stay, but you've got to live in a Palestine,
right?
And it's all got to be, the whole order of that specific country has to be changed,
right?
But that's not going to happen because the fact is already on the ground. Right. You're talking about a revolutionary upheaval like that would cause a World War III type situation because it's an existential thing for Israelis.
It's not ideal. It doesn't make people feel good, kind of thing that they have to, but it never does. In conflict, we're talking really here. What you're really talking about here is conflict resolution, international conflict resolution, and there's
above all else,
right. And there are people. Probably there are people who have usually they're diplomats from different countries or members of UN organizations or something that have gone into various different countries that have had long-term historical conflicts, and they go in and they try to start a reconciliation program. And when there's a lot of pain and hurt and dead people from families and all kind of stuff on both sides, it's very difficult to get those people to talk to each other, to live with each other. It's a long process, and somebody has to go in, and the main point in terms of that, the goal of that mediator going in is you can't highlight or sideline or marginalize one group, even if it's true that they are the bad one. You cannot actually treat them worse than anybody else because you're not going to get the reconciliation and towards a positive, more stable future that you want to achieve. So it's unsavory and it's distasteful to have to do that, especially if you've got if you've got a moral compass pointing in the right direction. But you have to deal with that. You simply, you end up having to deal with murderers and have them sit down at the table with their victims, or have two murderers sit down together and try and find ways for them to to get on.
It's distasteful, but you're doing it actually for a higher order goal,
Right.
which is to reduce the war.
Right.
First and foremost, let's
Right.
just, or at least hold it where it is,
Mm-hmm.
and then work to see if we can get it down. So it's actually the highest goal, as distasteful as it all can be, meeting Netanyahu and so on.
Yeah. The point is that Russia doesn't need, because this is Russia's backyard and Russia has strong ties. I mean, people should not underestimate, and it can't be overemphasized, the geography of the situation, of the geopolitical situation right now, in the sense that, the countries in the region all have a lot in common. Well, they have one really big thing in common, which is that they all share a relatively small landmass together. So there's all sorts of natural things that would come as a result of that if there was peace or a peaceful relations would be all sorts of trade and economic links. Basically, make you friends with people once you're doing business with them. Once you're in a mutually beneficial business agreement or association, you're more or less friends. You're not going to go to war with them usually, and the same that applies to those countries in the Middle East, all of them, and it also applies to Russia because it's more or less Russia's backyard. The problem is that Russia doesn't need to have lots of military bases in these countries. It doesn't need to hold these countries. It just needs peace to break out, and then Russia and everybody else benefits. That's not true for America. For America, as you may have noticed, America needs to hold countries or hold parts of the world or parts of countries through military means. They need to have military bases in those countries, and from those military bases, then they can engage in all sorts of as necessary, any kind of provocations or stir things up, or fund kind of rebel armies and all that kind of stuff. Because to a large extent, because of America's geographic position in the world and where it actually wants to, the areas that it wants to control, which are thousands of miles away, it's ultimately fighting against a kind of, in many cases, it finds itself fighting against a natural, cohesive order among the countries in that region, because they would all get together and it'd be easier for them to trade with each other than with America. So how does America get them to trade with America, which is 5,000 miles away? Well, you sow conflict and you pit one against the other and all that kind of stuff. It's
more,
unfortunate.
It's more like a mafia racket.
Right, yeah. You need to go into other neighborhoods and control them from afar. But I mean, those neighborhoods would work it out themselves eventually. If there wasn't that foreign interference, and it all stems from America's designs on the world, effectively, that go way back, and before that, maybe the British Empire or whatever. It stems from their designs on controlling as much of the world as possible. And one country and one geographic area in the world cannot control the rest of the world indefinitely without doing it by force in some way, or force, manipulation, dirty tricks,
deception,
whatever, or seeding conflict or showing conflict. It just doesn't happen, because there is a natural order where countries in the same geographic area do business with each other and learn to get on with each other. I mean, sure, they'll have wars or fights or stuff, at different times or different periods, but eventually they, especially in the modern age, right, where there's more potential to do more damage, there's a lot of incentives to not fight with your neighbors, and a lot of incentives, obviously economic incentives, to do business with them. Yeah.
So there is an element of Russia balancing Israel against Iran here.
Trying to, yeah.
But maybe the difference perhaps is that it's not doing so to gain an advantage for one of them, or for itself through one of them.
No, kind of for everybody.
For everyone.
But it's a tall order, in my estimation, because Israel, the Israelis are kind of, at least if you listen to them, they're pathologically, the political class and much of the population, or a lot of the population, are pathologically paranoid. I mean, they've had the whole, the Holocaust thing, and the guys or the non-Jews, whatever, are out to get us, and at any moment it could happen again. It doesn't really make for a stable kind of cooperative, let's say, friendly approach to those people who you suspect of potentially at any minute seeking your destruction. Now, I mean, that's what they say. Do they really believe that? I don't know. I think you can't say that kind of thing. Uh, the number of times that the Israelis have said it throughout over the course of decades without it becoming a part of your mentality in some way or other, even if it's just you understand that it's a bit of a ruse in a certain sense. And obviously it affects the population because you have to propagandize the population to believe that, to justify your actions, that, we need to defend ourselves, remember Nazis and Hitler and Holocaust, it could happen again, and you kind of pathologize yourself in a certain sense. So Israel's a big problem in that respect, and Israel obviously has, for a long time, has had a lot of control and still does have a lot of control in the US. I mean, I don't think we should go into all the ways in which Israel has worked the Israelis and the Israeli lobby in the US have worked their magic and stuff. I mean, it's at least one part kind of, coercion and, arm twisting and kind of some subtle forms of manipulation. And the other part would be the natural, I suppose, kind of Judeo-Christian ideological bias
Alignment.
that Americans would have with Israel and the concept of Israel being,
Especially
the Old
Americans.
Testament.
The missionary
Right.
thing is really strong.
Right.
Manifest destiny and all
Right.
that.
So there's a lot of people in America. Probably the problem is that there's a lot of people in America who are fully behind the Israeli narrative of Iran is evil. Iran is out to get us, and we need to destroy Iran. So that's why you have a lot of support in the US for get Iran, attack Iran, keep Iran back, push Iran back. Don't let them spread any influence. Trump himself has found common cause with the Israelis, with that Israeli narrative of Iran as evil, but not so much from an ideological perspective, because as far as I can tell, Trump isn't ideologically driven like the kind of deep state actors or the American exceptionalists who believe they should rule the world and stuff. Trump is more like a businessman, basically, and when he talks about Iran being a horrible, very bad, terrible deal, he just means it from a business perspective. And his backing out of the Iran deal is his plan to secure a better deal, basically, to fulfill or to follow up on his campaign promises of finding ways to make America great again, to increase jobs, increase income, get more money, show me the money, basically. And he hopes that he can do that, and there's a possibility that he'll be able to do that. And that's something else maybe we should talk about. Is about the details of the Iran deal, what's going to happen in terms of the US backing out of it and trying to impose sanctions on Iran.
Just before it, though, there's one more thing I want to say about the attack. The supposed Iranian attack first, and then the response by Israel. I think this is another reason why what we saw last week, just as we saw a month before with the Fucus airstrikes, were basically the upper limit of what they can do.
Right.
And why perhaps Putin/Russia would let it slide, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the Israeli account, we were attacked first by 20 rockets fired into the Golan Heights. However, they didn't do anything. 4 of the rockets were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome.
Right.
Remember that? And the rest just exploded on Syrian territory.
Yeah.
However,
because of crappy Iranian rockets, right?
Crap. The Lebanese media has a very different story. It says that this retaliation, not provocation, hit at least 10 targets. So they were half successful. Half of the 20 did hit something.
Mm-hmm.
So they both had a half and half hit success rate. So they're actually quite evenly matched.
Right.
And they listed very specific sites in the Golan Heights that were hit, and then said, well, and the report I read just simply cited that in the past it's well known that Israel has an absolute lock iron key over what the media reports about these things.
Absolutely.
And there's total silence whenever they take
a
hit. So they reported a totally different version of events as to what happened.
Israel has a branch of the military which is media liaison, basically, and they tell the media what to print, basically, from a military perspective. Go ahead.
Well, the Lebanese TV was telling Lebanese viewers on Mayadeen that 10 Israeli targets were hit, and they included smaller facilities like border stations, but also a military center for electronic jamming, a spy center for wireless and wired networks.
Mm-hmm.
A combat heliport was wiped out. Um, the headquarters of the Regional Military Command of Brigade 810, the command center of another military battalion at a place called Herman,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. And that there were very
Yeah.
likely casualties, but that was completely like it's a militarized zone within a country that's already heavily militarized. So they just simply put a mute on the hits that they took
Right.
and the likely casualties.
Right.
So what I was
And that was
getting
in
at there was
response. That was in response to them being attacked over the Syrians. So it was just basically Iran wasn't involved in that at all.
no, it was Syria and Israel.
That's something to remember. Yeah, exactly. Is that the media portrayed this as Israel attacks Iran attacks Israel, Israel attacks back, and it's all Iran. But actually, that's Iran wasn't involved in this at all. Basically, it was the Israelis launched attacks on Syrian anti-aircraft or air defense systems, and the Syrians responded by firing at these locations in the occupied Golan Heights.
I can draw another conclusion from this. You remember that the Israeli government warned people in the Golan Heights the day before,
right,
to be prepared and to go into shelters.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a twist in that, which is the implied thing was, oh, those people out there, Iranian, Syrians, whoever, will attack civilian
Are
targets.
planning to attack us.
Well, of course they didn't. They were specifically hitting military targets. But this nevertheless tells us that the Israelis had a realistic assessment of what Syrian / Hezbollah, I presume they were involved in this too, can and cannot do to them after they give them a surprise attack.
Yeah.
So the surprise attack provoked a retaliation that was almost equal in measure.
Maybe.
At least in terms of its success rate.
Yeah.
If that
10
out of 20 targets.
Well, there's a difference. There's a difference between the Israelis attacking Syrian air defenses well inside Syria, and the Syrians responding by shooting a few stations on the border of the Golan Heights, which is occupied territory, which actually belongs to Syria. Okay. So I mean, it's not like they fired at some bases outside Tel Aviv. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about this is that just to look at the way Russia set it up, basically, and Russia's plan, its broad, kind of long-standing, I suppose, at this point, plan for the Middle East, for what it's trying to do in the Middle East, it gave S-300 systems to Iran a couple of years ago, delivered them. And that was, and when they do that, they know that, I mean, the point of them doing that is to stop a major aerial bombardment of the country, like a decapitation, regime change kind of thing, Whereas they haven't given the S-300 to Syria. This is the other thing people in the alt media are screaming about is, why don't you give them S-300s? Russia's being, it's a moral duty to give.
Russia's allied with Israel.
Yeah.
Therefore.
Well, it's allied with Syria.
Right, but the claim is that covertly it's also allied with Syria because
it must be allied with Syria. Well, it's not against anybody is the point. It can't be against anybody in that region because of the potential for major conflict and destruction of everything Russia's been working for. And people don't seem to be able to or willing to accept that fact and to see the nuance and the complexities of it and how difficult it is. But the point is they give S-300s to Iran, and S-300s are designed to very effectively shoot down jets, military planes, any kind of military planes, and do it very effectively. I.e., if Russia had given the S-300 to Syria could have shot down most of those planes that flew into or even came close to Syria. But they've said recently, they made it pretty clear, the Russians have made it pretty clear that the Syrians are not getting the S-300 and that they have everything they need. What does that mean? That means that the Syrians have everything they need for their defense against the kind of rocket attacks or Tomahawk cruise missile attacks that the US and its allies would perpetrate against Syria, and also against Israel's periodic little forays. They can defend themselves fairly well, but they're not. What the Russians are saying is that Syria does not need the capability to shoot down foreign planes, i.e., American planes or Israeli planes. It should not do that because that would be a prelude to them being destroyed. So what Russia's saying is, we're not giving Syria the capability to be the architect of its own destruction and the destruction of everything that Russia has worked for in Syria by having the capability to shoot down American or Israeli planes.
Before they even leave Israel.
Right. They're not giving them that capability. They don't need it. All they need to do is be able to defend themselves against these kind of rocket attacks and the process will continue. There is a process ongoing behind that Russia is kind of spearheading, and it's a natural order, like I've been saying, making itself felt effectively. The more you stabilize the Middle East and further across into Eurasia, and the more you knit that continent together, the more Russia's kind of grand plan and China's grand plan is achieved.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the one thing that definitely scares the American exceptionalists, the ones who think America should rule the world, because it spells the end of their hegemony. And it also freaks out Israel specifically because of the Middle East, not the broader Eurasian integration, but a sea change in the power structures of the Middle East freaks out Israel because Israel's afraid that it will lose out big time in that respect as well. And Russia is having to keep the Israelis, calm, let's say, or do its best to keep the Israelis calm and to give them assurances. And it's a big assurance. I mean, the fact that Netanyahu was at the Moscow Victory Day parade is very significant. It shows that Netanyahu is happy with what Russia is doing, that it feels confident. He's willing to publicly show that effectively that Israel has confidence in Syrian mediation in the Middle East. That it's a hat tip to Russia, as we respect you, basically, and that obviously means that Russia has done the right things and said the right things to make Israel feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best Russia can do at this point.
There was a headline in Harris today saying that Netanyahu last week, in having Trump renege on the Iran deal on the Tuesday,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the Wednesday be the guest of honor for Putin, he had scored the royal flush.
Right.
They can take that too far,
Mm-hmm.
the wishful thinking that and that would be exactly what the conspiracy theory angle is. Oh, you see, well, Israel controls both.
Right.
Jesus, that's how powerful it is. But of course, there's a question. We'll get to it in a minute about Trump's thinking on all of this. We've given a fair bash to what Putin's situation is, all the things he has to deal with. And now we'll think about maybe what Trump has to deal with. I'll just say though, before we switch a bit, that even though the mainstream media just accepted the Israeli version of events last week, Iran attacked us. We defended ourselves. They still produced analyses of the situation that were taking stock of reality. That I was surprised. So the Guardian's Middle Eastern correspondent Martin Cherlov, the latest Israeli barrage has galvanized the belief that the two foes, Israel and Iran, are on a collision course. Blah, blah, blah. It does not, however, mark a new phase in the highly dangerous standoff. And here's a reality check. Iran's calculation, he writes, is that it just needs to absorb the damage Israeli jets are causing. Now, that's basically just switch in Syria there for Iran. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
Syria can just absorb this, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Iranian leaders have invested many lives and enormous amounts of money consolidating a presence in the ruins of Syria, and a large-scale retaliation would jeopardize gains that could soon change the balance of power in the region.
Right.
So, going with the mainstream narrative of Israel versus Iran, World War III, Iran doesn't have to do anything.
Right.
And it didn't. Its response last week was a few words about, let's ease tensions. Okay, yeah, some of the more radical people, they took to Parliament and they burned the American flag, yada, yada. But the official statement was, chill, everyone, just chill.
Right. Yeah.
Because they're operating from a position of strength.
Yeah. You notice they didn't burn the Israeli flag.
Well, I think they burned the Trump flag and
then
the American flag after the announcement of the Iran deal. And that was before the airstrikes. But
right, yeah.
Even, here's another thing, even Lieberman, Israel's mad dog Lieberman, right? Commenting, I think this is before the airstrikes, but he's commenting on the results of the elections in Lebanon,
mm-hmm.
which was a majority success for the first time ever for Hezbollah.
Mm-hmm.
He, quote from him, Hezbollah has in practice completed its takeover of Lebanon. He, of course, is horrified by that
mm-hmm.
prospect, but it means it's now in complete control. It's not really, but it has majority control, not just of the Lebanese government, but also its army. From now on, he's putting the worst spin on this. From now on, a Lebanese sniper is a Hezbollah stand-in and takes direct orders from Hezbollah and Nasrallah. It's still a coalition government, but still, he finishes, "This is the new reality." So they're seeing. I mean, they're seeing what's going on, and that's supposedly the malignant Iranian influence in
Right.
one of the two countries, Syria and Lebanon, and of course the other one is Iraq, which also had elections this week. Lebanon now has a majority government where the popular will is aligned with the Iranian view of the Middle East, and this is the malignant Iranian influence that the Israelis and the Americans are harping on and on and on about. But it's come about organically,
Mm-hmm.
democratically, as a result of the way they've been trying to reconfigure the Middle East for the last 30, 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
They completely hoisted on their own petard. Yes, it's the new reality and you created it, which is completely contrary to what you ever wanted to happen.
Well, I mean, about the Lebanese elections, it's kind of ridiculous. I mean, Lebanon has about 60% of the population of Lebanon is Muslim. About half of that are Shia. I suppose the other half are Sunni. Um, Lebanon, Hezbollah is a Shia organization, but it basically the reason it's so popular is because it has for a long time now has taken the lead on kind of social services in the country and provides a lot of basic social services. Doctors and ambulances and like hospitals. It finances a lot of that stuff. It's taken over at the level where that actually benefits people, that people really feel it in their pockets, type of thing, and that's why they're so popular. But the bottom line is, it's so a lot of the Sunni, there isn't that kind of Shia Sunni divide. There isn't that really that Shia Sunni divide traditionally in the Middle East anyway. Any kind of serious Shia Sunni enmity. It can be exacerbated or it can be stoked at certain times, but it doesn't historically. It doesn't really exist. Shia and Sunni traditionally kind of intermarried in many places in the Middle East. So, and in Lebanon, that's not an issue. I mean, the Sunni and the Shia together support Hezbollah, and they make up 60% of the population. So why wouldn't they be a majority in the country? Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't Hezbollah have a controlling stake in the country when 60% of the population supports them? The same as Putin. Why should Putin? You know, why does Putin keep getting elected? Because majority of Russians support him. Maybe is that bad? Yeah, from a certain perspective, it's bad. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. On the thing about Trump is like I think we said already on. So Trump has this. There's this convergence or alignment between Trump's kind of like show me the money businessman election manifesto or election promises, him trying to fulfill those and stick with that basically. There's an alignment between that and Israel, and that's why you're seeing. I mean, he's obviously I don't want to. We can't really get into it too much, but obviously the Israel lobby and those that support Israel within the U.S. are a serious force to be reckoned with, and they have a lot of influence and have had a lot of influence going back many decades over U.S. presidents. I mean, there's just another article here I'll throw up on the screen. It's from a guy from a blog basically, but he has all his sources cited and stuff, and he's making the case. The title is "Follow the Money: How Three Billionaires Paved the Way for Trump to Withdraw from the Iran Deal." And the three guys are Paul Singer, Bernard Marcus, and Sheldon Adelson. They're fairly well known. At least Adelson is fairly well known in the US, has been for a long time. But those three are basically Israel firsters. They're full on backers of Israel and have been for most of their lives. And those three are together donated something like 40 or 50 million to the Trump campaign, more or less. So Trump is under the influence of those kind of people, as every U.S. president is to one extent or another. But the point here is that it's not just simply another U.S. president doing the bidding of Israel, but rather that Trump sees that backing out of the Iran deal, which Israel obviously, and these guys obviously, anything that hurts Iran, these guys think it's a good idea, and that's they would have seriously supported or encouraged Trump to back out of the Iran deal. But Trump himself had personal reasons based on his MAGA mandate to back out of the Iran deal and to try and renegotiate it. And this is the other aspect of it now, is in terms of what's going to happen as a result of Trump backing out of the Iran deal.
But the European reaction is
No thanks.
it's unprecedented. I mean, some of the language they've been using is like the V word I heard for the first time from the French foreign minister. Uh, what he asked a rhetorical question about are we going to be a vassal? Are we going to be a vassal who obeys America?
Yeah. Shock, horror. What a thought.
But 10 years ago, you'd be like conspiracy theorists. That's the realm of you don't talk about those things.
Yeah.
When we were pointing out that Europe's a vassal of the United States, and suddenly they discovered what the concept of sovereignty or
Yeah, because they were dropped basically by Trump, and I mean it's not looking good, and I see a lot of ways. If obviously Trump seems to be going ahead, there's still we have to wait and see because there's a kind of 6 month grace period between now and there's 2 dates where you have to kind of like companies are being forced, will be forced in theory. There's August and then November. By November, basically, everybody in the world, technically, because America says so, pretty much every single person in the world, potentially all 8 billion of them, have to walk away from any dealings they are doing with Iran. Of course, it's not 8 billion people, but all the companies in the world, no matter where they are, Europe, everywhere, everybody has to stop buying and selling from Iran. Or else.
Or else what?
Or else America will hurt you.
Financially. Presumably not militarily.
No, I don't think so militarily. But they'll try and they'll hurt. But that for a lot of people, that's economic war is can be just as bad or can potentially be. Certainly, that's what Israel would like to see out of America backing out of this Iran deal, i.e., and reimposing really punitive sanctions on Iran. They would like to see Iran, all but destroyed or turned into a kind of a meek, backward kind of nation where it's basically contained economically, where it has to go cap in hand begging to people, and therefore you have all the leverage you want over them. You basically contain it to its geographic borders, basically, and even then, it has to still ask you for permission to do things. That's what Israel wants to see with Iran, and the kind of American exceptionists as well, because Israel's afraid of Iran because if it spreads into the Middle East, it thinks that it would ultimately be the end of Israeli influence in the Middle East. And America, the deep state in America, sees expansion of Iran, but not just Iran, but the whole Eurasian project and Russia, etc., as spelling or portending the end of American influence, kind of American hegemony, let's say, in the world. And they're centered on the Middle East because there's an order in the Middle East, that largely centered around Saudi Arabia and Israel that has prevailed for the past 70 years. And that order is the American world order, the American global order, and it has hinged on the existence of Saudi Arabia and Israel, and of course American military bases. But the influence that particularly Saudi Arabia and Israel has afforded America is what has maintained American hegemony, including the petrodollar and all that kind of stuff, has enabled and maintained American hegemony. So I mean, it's not an overstatement to say that this is a kind of existential crisis, at least from the point of view of people who think that their entire existence is justified or based on the idea that they sit on top of the heap. And if we fall, even if we fall a few places, that's like an existential crisis. It's more or less like a death to us.
Right. So the petrodollar must stand.
Right.
Bottom line, let's say, U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. Israel and isolating Iran, it's a bonus. They both have equal measure, whatever. It's all wrapped up.
Not a bonus. It's central to maintaining the petrodollar.
Okay.
is to keep Iran down.
Okay.
And keep the current order in the Middle East.
So, the French foreign minister this week, in response to this announcement, says to maintain European investments already made in Iran and potential ones in the pipeline, no pun intended, we're looking at how to strengthen Europe's financial independence. He asked rhetorically, what can we do to give Europe more financial tools, allowing it to be independent from the United States? One proposal is to set up a purely European finance house to oversee euro-denominated transactions, right. Which is the end of the petrodollar, but a big hit to it.
It's a hit to the dollar. as the currency for international trade, and that's the means by which Trump and the American what's the name of it? Had it there somewhere. It's a little known government agency, a financial intelligence agency in the U.S. called the Office of Foreign Assets Control. It's very powerful. Office of Foreign Assets Control. It's an enforcement agency of the U.S. Treasury Department, and it administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions in support of U.S. national security and foreign policy objectives. Under presidential national emergency powers, the OFAC carries out its activities against foreign states as well as a variety of other organizations and individuals who are deemed to be a threat to U.S. national security. And their power, I mean, you're talking here about the power, we're talking here about the extent to which the US, the reason why the US is the biggest economy in the world and the greatest power in the world, the only superpower in the world, is because it has infiltrated many areas of the world in many different ways, militarily and economically. And now that ability, that infiltration, that network that they have established over many decades is what they are leveraging, what they plan to leverage, and what they do leverage when they impose sanctions on other countries and their control over the way economic or world trade is done through the banking system, that cash flows, that trade flows when you buy something from one country and you want to pay them, it has to go through a certain banking system and stuff, and they can cut that off and stop those payments actually happening. And they can also obviously sanction in that way. That's how they sanction countries. So it's not just a matter of America saying, or Trump saying, nobody's allowed to do business with Iran. And then European countries going, I'm going to do it anyway. And American going, damn you. You're not meant to do that. Stop that.
It doesn't sound like isolationism to me. That sounds like it's all mine. But the rhetoric from Europe is, well, America's leaving us behind, so we have to take over the mantle of the world leader.
Trump can't engage. He can't engage in true fiscal conservatism or isolationism because America is already so spread around the world. He's not about, and he recognizes that as an advantage. But he wants to leverage that advantage directly for American gain. So it's isolationism in the sense of not pulling away from the Obama and really before that, going back many years, the idea of America policing the world. Because when you talk about America policing the world, you really talk about America kind of funding the world in one way or another, throwing billions of dollars at countries as a means to control them. Of course, the countries do get some benefits from that, but primarily it's for America to keep its hand in that country. Trump looks at the figures and that and says, it's ridiculously expensive. It's not good for the American economy. I'm going to stop doing that. But I'm not going to sacrifice the leverage that our empire or the structure of our empire affords me to do hardcore business and just get the money. Show me the money. Screw giving aid to countries. Let's do really good deals with countries so America profits, so American businesses profit, and there's more jobs and all that kind of stuff.
So he is thinking, is he thinking with respect to the Iran deal, we didn't get any good investment projects out of this, right? And everyone, especially Europe's getting a ton out of this. So I'm mutuing it. Or is it more, is he actually also thinking geopolitically, where that threatens the petrodollar system, so I'm going to keep it isolated? Right. I'm not sure which
both. That's why he finds an alignment with Iran, or finds an alignment with Israel,
right,
in terms of serving Israel's objectives of keeping Iran down. He wants to go back to. So the first thing he's planning to do, or he's going to do, is impose these ridiculously punitive measures on Iran that could destroy the Iranian economy, literally, and then use that as leverage to say to Iran, okay, here's what you're going to do now. Here's what you have to do. And that suits Israel and that suits Trump, because it basically keeps Iran under the thumb as basically a subservient to US dictates. So it can't really do anything against Israel. It's gonna have to curtail its influence in the Middle East and only do business with preferential customers like Iran, and with the US, and he'll throw some bones to Europe or whoever, still likes him, is still friendly with, and throw some to them. So he has this idea that he can control Iran. Him and the Israelis can control Iran. One of them for Trump for economic reasons, and Israel for geostrategic reasons, and Trump also for geostrategic reasons, but only with economics as the end result. You know what I mean? So my point is here is that very clear that Trump is not ideologically driven. And I've said that before. He's not ideologically driven in the same way that the manifest destiny type people are. The nut jobs and the deep state and stuff. And it's not even that they think they want to own the world. They kind of they do want to own the world, but in a fairly destructive kind of way, in a master slave kind of way. It's a pernicious ideology they have. It's spun obviously as humanitarianism and keeping the world safe and stuff, but it's not. It's about keeping everybody else down, and that costs a lot of money. And Trump wants to reconfigure that in a different way. He wants to still do a lot of business and all that kind of stuff and still exert America's influence, but he doesn't want to pay the money that's required to keep all of those countries compliant, basically. Because, I mean, a country, you have to, I mean, you can't, America hasn't gone around the world. They have gone around the world periodically bombing countries and that, but most of what they've been doing is keeping countries uh, as compliant vassals through throwing money at them.
Yeah,
They're paid slaves and they're
along
paid,
the lines of
paid for their
Confessions of an
compliance.
Economic Hitman by John Perkins.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, now and again, they'll overthrow, of course, they overthrow governments and that kind of stuff. But ultimately, when they overthrow a government and a new one comes in, then they're given lots of kind of money and military stuff. And, they're helping the economies of those countries. They're helping those countries, Of course, in a kind of capitalist way, but it's not so bad in that sense,
But in a way that controls the level of development and
Right.
how they develop and
Right.
who they co-develop with.
Exactly.
So do you think Trump then, are we going to see an evil streak here finally from him in the sense that he will actually carry through his intention and crush Iran economically?
Well, he won't be able to if. I mean, he's not going to. I don't think he's going to be able to. He thinks he is, but he's not. I don't think he's going to be able to.
Because remember, he brought in John Bolton not long ago.
Right.
And John Bolton had just announced at a major conference in Paris with the group that calls itself the Iranian new regime in waiting, the new government in waiting, that you will all be in power come January 2019. I mean, is there like a timetable? And this is all go.
But John Bolton's a nut job. Like he's like the evil Ned Flanders, and Hidley Ho, he's Hidley Ho Iran. He's he's crazy. He's a crazy person, That doesn't. And he's dangerous because he's a crazy person. He's not insane, but he's crazy in terms of his. He's an ideologue, really. Yeah. But he's not. They're not going to be able to do what they want to do with Iran ultimately, because especially if. Well, even if Europe were to fall in behind it, it would hurt the Iranian economy. But Iran can, I don't think China, based on the noises coming out of China is not going to sign up to any kind of the imposition of any sanctions on Iran, because China buys a lot of oil and gas and sells a lot of stuff to Iran, and it's not about to just dump that trade because America says so. Obviously, Russia wouldn't either, but the big thing here is the breakaway of the EU, basically, and the EU cutting their ties with the US.
Yeah.
But that's not the end of it. That doesn't mean that Trump's plan then will be defeated and will be kind of stillborn in a certain sense, or dead in the water. It's because there's still a lot of leverage for the US to hurt European companies or try to apply that pressure, because it's not just we tell them, like I said before, it's not just a matter of saying European companies stop doing business with Iran, and they just get to say no, and then carry on and nothing happens. If European companies or any other companies say no to America, then America has measures or means to try and force those companies to stop doing business with Iran. One example is that there's so much, we live in a globalized world, and there's so much investment, particularly between in Anglo-America, let's say, in between, the EU and America. There's a lot of bilateral trade, and there's a lot of investment, mutual investments in companies across the Atlantic. So in order to force European companies, for example, it would depend on a case-by-case basis, but any investments that America has, and here I'm talking about government investments, and not just at the federal level, but at the state level, because state legislators all decide. I mean, states have their own, collect their own taxes and have their own investments. They basically invest in the same way a country does, to a large extent, in companies like like an ordinary person would. You invest your money, like Florida or California, or any U.S. state. Basically, they all make decisions to invest invest their money into companies in the same way you or I would. So they have that leverage of pulling and it's a lot of money. So they have that leverage of pulling that money out of companies that are violating Trump's order to not do business with Iran. So let's say, you know, um, Airbus or Siemens or any big kind of European company is decides to ignore Trump's demand that they
Hmm.
stop doing business with Iran, they keep doing business with Iran, then they have that kind of leverage where they basically get all those states together, but to decide individually just to pull their money out of those companies and
So,
hurt those companies economically.
so it's not just a matter of saying, right, we just got to get around the US dollar and we'll set up a system where we can trade in euros directly with
No,
Iran because the US is all up in
no,
European
but that's
systems
not.
and
But
companies.
what I just said isn't only one way as well. It's basically you got to really think carefully about whether you're going to kick off that kind of a trade war because obviously those companies and European states are invested in American companies and European
Of course.
companies are invested in American companies. And if you pull your money out of my company, I'm pulling my money out of your company. And you do that at the national level where like, you know, the US, some US states who have invested in Siemens pull their money out of it and hurt Siemens the company, and that's a German company, then the German government will talk to another German company that has invested in the US and say, listen, why don't you think about pulling your money out of your investments in U.S. companies? And then everybody starts hurting, you know.
This could
But
turn
America,
into an epic,
yeah, it could go,
epic
yeah.
auto collapse
Well,
of the West.
it could actually be kind of a domino that causes an economic crash. The much the long predicted collapse
The big
of
one.
the global economy. This could be something that sets that in motion.
The Trump is obviously deadly serious.
I
And the Europeans
think he's
know they
nuts.
can't just, I mean, they kind of did metaphorically flip the bird at him this week. Der Spiegel had this editorial and a cover on their weekly edition this week.
Right.
The middle finger with Trump's hair on it or something
Yeah.
like that.
His head on it.
And that's all well and good. And there were all these harsh words. We don't want to be a vassal. It's time for Europe to grow up. European leaders just rediscover sovereignty, like I said. It sounds great, but I mean, are they really prepared to go to the wall here? Because Trump sounds serious. American
I mean,
slash Israeli
I mean,
mutual interests are deadly serious, we
yeah,
know.
I'll leave it open that Trump is doing engaging in his
Is it
transparent art of the deal
is it an
here.
art of the deal type
You have to wait
maneuver?
and see for the next 6 months whether I mean because there's waivers that can be given to companies where they don't have to stop doing business in Iran. They can keep doing business in Iran. You know, the U.S. this U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control will hand out waivers to companies that apply for them and say, okay, you can keep doing business in Iran. Okay, you can keep doing this in Iran. Or you can keep doing this amount of business in Iran. That kind of thing. You know, so we'll have to see where that goes. You know, but I think this is Trump testing the waters. Like he does. You know, the art of the deal is you aim high, right? You say, I want, you know, this much, and then you know you only want half that. You know, so
The thing is, the European Union does not have, and not just the EU, but the establishments in a lot of Western European countries, especially, are on weak ground. They're not in a position for a fight. Now, one thing I got from this week is that there's been a lot of. I could see how potentially an attack like this from the outside could rally Europe together in a way that hasn't been seen yet. At the same time, though, the foundations are so weak
hmm
of a European identity. I could see them trying to sort of stitch it together. So,
we throw Brexit into the middle of that.
right,
The
I mean,
potential for Brexit. Well, big question is Brexit going to happen? Do they have an intention of doing it? Are they going to pull the rug on Brexit and then it's just going to go back the way it was before with the UK as a full member of the EU, and it all will have just been a big farce that everybody should be very very annoyed about because you just wasted our time over 2 years. You know, if that happens, then well, whatever. That's of no significance other than just the time wasted. Uh, but if the US leaves or the UK leaves the European Union, then they're in a position where they're in an economically vulnerable position, and they increasingly, I mean, in terms of people who are looking at what they would do in the situation with Brexit, they're going to have to be doing spot deals or spot trade agreements with countries in different places. Obviously, America being one, but they're going to have to look much further east, you know, to China and all that kind of stuff, you know. So yeah, it's all coming apart at the seams basically, and Brexit is fun. It's funny that just the Brexit's right there in the middle of it, you know, in terms of that breaking of the because Brexit makes it difficult for uh, Brexit is actually probably one of the main reasons that apart from Trump, but Brexit is one of the main reasons that the UK aligned itself in rejecting in saying that they would stay in the Iran deal and siding with Iran and Germany, because they, in another timeline, they could have fully supported Trump
And
in
Israel.
reimposing those sanctions, you know. But they haven't, you know. They've been muted. You know, it was France and Germany who were very loud about saying we're going to stay with the deal, and it's kind of like the UK was behind, looking over the shoulder of Germany and France, going, yeah, and us too, we're going to stay in it too,
Well,
because you need the business
they
basically.
issued a
Because
joint statement. The three
right,
M's, the M&Ms,
right,
as
yeah, right,
Polly Boyko
three
calls
M's, yeah,
them.
yeah,
Merkel and Macron may immediately put out a joint statement
right,
to the effect that we're not leaving.
yeah,
So we're going to carry on.
yeah.
It's fighting words, but we'll see.
Absolutely, and you know,
There's some symbolism, I thought, in where Macron and Merkel gave a lot of their statements this week. They were meeting in Aachen,
right,
where Merkel was awarding Macron with the International Charlemagne Prize. Don't even ask me what it's for. Anyway, he was awarded. Maybe he was awarded with it for getting elected and saving Europe or something.
Sure, it wasn't the International Charlatan Prize. Charlatan Mangy Prize.
Charlemagne is, of course, a quasi mythological founding leader
French king
of the Holy Roman Empire.
Right.
Aachen, La Chapelle in French, is the seat of the old Holy Roman Empire, where emperors for 500 years in the medieval times were coronated.
Right.
And that's the exact same. The coronation hall
Right.
of the Aachen town hall,
Very interesting.
which is the founding place. It's the origin point of both countries we today
Right.
call Germany and France. It was a
Right.
Frankish empire because they were one for so long.
And it harkens back to the Holy Roman Empire, right? Where the center of the world was Europe. So, I mean, you can imagine that when
Merkel can do symbolism, even if she doesn't do pageantry too well.
But it also speaks to possibly the impact or the seriousness of this situation for the EU, the European leaders. You know, because when they would add that little extra bit of detail, if you know what I mean, of having their meeting in the previous seat of the Holy Roman Empire, when they're talking about maybe the EU should take over America's role in the world.
Right.
Yeah, that suggests something pretty serious. But yeah, I mean, it's a whole globalization. America is the victim, in a certain sense, a victim of the success, or its own success, or at least its own vision of the world in terms of, you know, globalization and America spreading itself around the world and spreading Coca-Cola and all the wonderful technology and stuff all around the world. You know, I mean, it didn't really do that in any kind of a benevolent way, but you know, it's one result of American influence in the world, because America has a big influence in the world. You know, American culture and everything has a massive influence in the world.
People liked it for a long time,
right?
You know, they looked to it.
And globalization and the development of technology and stuff has just made it very difficult now for. And this is why I keep saying that they're fighting against reality, because, you know, I mean, you know, 30 or 40 years ago, a lot of big countries in the world, Russia, China, were fairly, you know, were kind of backwaters or backward. They weren't certainly global powers that could exert their influence in the way they can today. So in a very short period of time, because of that kind of exponential increase in the spread and the development of technology, you know, or the development of technology and the spread of it around the world, means that, you know, America, just the idea that one country, like in days of old British Empire or America, could rule the world with that kind of heavy hand, just it's not possible anymore. It's simply not possible anymore. You know, as other countries rise up, America isn't a big country as far as, you know, in the list of big powerful countries in the world. You know, by the standard, or by the meaningful or rational measures of power. You know, I mean, America, what, 350 million people? Well, China's got 1.5 billion. You know, size.
India's got 1.2 billion.
Yeah. You know, I mean, in terms of human resources and power, and once you just inject technology into that, well, then it really comes down to, if you have an equalization of access to technology, it comes down to natural resources and population. And that, whatever country has has the most of both of those, they're the ones who lead the world, right? They're the most powerful and most industrious and most wealthy country in the world.
The natural democratic order.
Right. But that's what America's fighting against, and that's why they're going to lose. Because they're not fighting against nation states anymore. It's not about Iran. I mean, they can project onto one country, oh, that evil Iran is trying to take over. No, it's actually a natural developmental process. it's kind of like a bully in a schoolyard getting angry and blaming the kid, one of the kids, or the kids who used to be smaller than him, who hit puberty. You know, he hit puberty earlier and he got a hairy chest and big arms and was able to dominate the other kids. The other kids just took a couple of years to start, and they started growing muscles and stuff and got taller. And now they're the same size as him and the same muscles as him. And he's blaming them for conspiring to grow as big as him for nefarious purposes. You imagine the mindset that thinks that that's what America thinks. That's what these deep state actors. That's what they actually are blaming these other countries for naturally growing up. And how dare you? This is a nefarious conspiracy to take down America. No, it's a effing natural order. You bunch of Jesus Christ. I mean, it just blows my mind that these people they're freaking
Yeah.
insane and they're going to lose because they're fighting against reality. Forget about fighting against Russia or China or Iran. It's not. They're fighting against a natural order, a reality that is no one's fault. No one conspired to do it. People, it's just happening as a natural, as natural as evolution. How are you gonna? Well, there's one way you can actually defeat that, and America is well versed in it. You bomb it back to the Stone Age. You blow it up. You kill it. That's how you stop that from happening.
So the strategy to deal with that for everyone else is to simply acquire the means for the US not to have that outlet. It cannot do that because there's a corresponding matching of a
Right.
technological
Right.
military
Of course.
technology on the other side.
Right. And
So
those,
it can no longer do it. And then
those countries that are naturally coming up, they don't need aggressive.
no.
They're accused of acquiring aggressive means of potentially attacking America and stuff. No, they don't want that. Like you just said, all they have to do is acquire the means to defend themselves so that they can allow the natural developmental process to continue. And you see very
Under the
clearly that
safety
that's what
of-
Russia understands and that's what China understands.
Yeah. China
And even Iran understands that now, that even in the case of the Middle East, it simply doesn't have to attack Israel, it doesn't have to blow up Israel. It simply needs, especially under the auspices of kind of Russian mediation, and Syria can just sit there and they can absorb these blows, these lashing out, this lashing out from Israel and the US against them, and just make sure that they don't have the ability to stop you from progressing as you naturally would.
When I was looking back at who has and has not either the S300 or S400 or equivalent, Iran, you mentioned, most recently acquired the systems. We know
S300.
Turkey's trying to buy the systems.
So Turkey is getting it, yeah.
Is getting it. China has. India has.
Right.
All these countries, and when you think
But
about
see-
it, it's like a canopy of prevention against shock and awe being
Yeah.
spread over the world.
Yeah, we're just
And
trying
that space into which the US can do that is shrinking, and it makes the paranoics go completely insane. I have no outlet to bomb people anymore.
Right.
What am I going to do?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that they give it to Turkey and give it to that Russia gave the S300 to Turkey or S400, was it 300 or 400? S300 maybe to Turkey and to Iran was calculated, and it was 2 years ago that they gave it to Iran, and that was calculated because Russia understood that these two countries in particular, Iran and Turkey, because of their positions, well, Iran's resources and its size, and then Turkey being this kind of like linchpin between the Middle East and Europe. Those two countries, if they speak the same language, which they are speaking more or less the same language as us, have the same kind of vision as us, then they need the ability to not be bombed back to the Stone Age. And that's all. And you just need to give them to them.
Russia was going to give it to Iran 10, 15 years ago.
Right.
But our Western partners
asked us not to.
Right.
Right.
Then they go through the Iran deal, 12 years of negotiation. It's signed,
Yeah.
boom, sale of
Right.
S-300s to
Right.
Iran.
Right. And the reason, I mean, you have to understand as well, Russia's perspective towards Iran is that Russia doesn't want Iran to have nukes either, nuclear weapons either. I mean, whether or not that's a big ruse, because of course the mullahs and the clerics in Iran have said that they don't want nukes either.
They tried to create a nuke-free Middle East.
They said it's against their religion, Iran, that it goes against their religion. Now, whether or not, I mean, whether or not you believe that is another question, because, of course, having nuclear weapons totally changes the game in the sense of, the presence that you have and your ability to assert your rights changes a lot, But
I've read quite a few reports that they were already seeking on the market prior to ceasing all activity in 2003, they'd already been on the market for um, trigger detonators and all sorts of stuff, like the final layers of stuff that you
Right.
need just to make the bomb. You've already got
Right.
the high yield uranium and stuff.
Right.
So they probably do.
They probably already have one, yeah.
Um,
They do want, they would like to, they would be allowed to, but in the right conditions, they'd be happy not to. You know, they're not. It's not a sticking point, if you know what I mean. As long as other conditions are right, you know. And nobody, a lot of countries don't have nukes, and they do very well. You know, they don't need to have nukes to prosper. You know. Yeah, but you know, we'll have to wait and see what way the sanctions business goes. I mean, I just put up another headline here on the screen. For you to have a look at. I don't really need to comment on it, I suppose. China's new train line to Iran sends message to Trump. We'll keep trading anyway. So basically, China is I think has built, is inaugurated, or is being inaugurated very soon, a new train line from Iran, from China to Iran, direct, and it's for carrying, primarily for carrying
Freight.
cargo. It's for carrying cargo, and it's like, what are you going to do? Bomb it? You know, of course, like we said earlier on, there are other ways that the US has to punish countries that continue to trade, but like that is a double-edged sword because it, like we said, it kicks off a trade war. And is America able to survive such a trade war? You know, and ultimately, Trump flip-flops so much, and that's based on his art of the deal thing, where he'll bluff and bluster and come out with a big, his high demand basically is
And throw you off guard.
throw you off guard, and then you see that people accuse him of flip flopping and backing down from things and all that kind of stuff. But that's the way he operates. It's in his silly book that he wrote. You know, the art of the deal. That's what he does. I mean, it's like why is anybody surprised that he does that? And that because part of that his fairly basic political business philosophy is so you go in high knowing that you'll accept less. And if that's the way he's going to or has been, uh, um, you know, managing his presidency and managing a lot of his if that informs a lot of his decisions and stuff, it's always going to appear as he either flip flops or backs down and stuff. So and also he gets accused of exaggerating and bluffing and bluster, but that's freaking that's what he says. That's how he runs his business empire supposedly. You know what I mean? I mean it's very simplistic, but anyway. Um, yeah, it's no surprise really. So we'll have to wait and see what happens. Maybe he'll back down on a lot of there'll be lots of waivers handed out. He'll back down on the sanctions or punishing European countries and stuff. But I think already, even if he does, he's made it pretty clear that things are changing. That he's no longer going to America's no longer, at least under Trump, no, America's no longer going to be financing many of the things that it has been financing around the world, and that's bad enough for the Europeans. It's enough to instill in the Europeans a sense that we need to, you know, straighten up and fly on our own. Now we need to change things. We need to take a more independent approach to a lot of things, you know. And once you've opened that door, it's hard to close it again, you know, because as Europe starts to make changes in its own structure and its own economic and its own business deals and economy, the way it's structured, you establish new those kind of new links. And even if Trump is booted out or in a few years and someone else comes in that wants to turn it back, it's hard to, you know, because you're asking to Europe then to undo kind of established business connections that they've had to establish as a result of these sanctions. You know, so it's kind of like Russia. You know, the sanctions against Russia. Russia's kind of was forced over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years since they've been sanctioning Russia, has been forced to look eastward a lot more. And even if those sanctions were lifted and companies wanted to get access to markets, Russia's like, sorry, you told me I couldn't do business with you, so I looked elsewhere. I'm not going to change now just because you want me to, unless you give me a better deal. But you know, so yeah, it's there are. I think even despite, regardless of what happens with the sanctions and the Iran deal, backing out of Iran deal and imposing sanctions on the whole world over Iran, basically, regardless of how far that goes, there's big changes afoot, basically, and or have more or less already been implemented. You know, especially when you look at the way like we were saying, the way Merkel and Macron responded to it. You know, that they took it really seriously. There was a serious business for them. You know what I mean? It was like this was a shock to the system. You know.
And Merkel's new foreign minister this week made his first port of call a visit to Moscow.
Right.
So again, that was on the basis of confirming their joint commitment to the Iran deal,
Mm.
but they also mentioned settling situation in Ukraine, Nord Stream 2/3. So yeah, I suppose get a move on with it, Europe. Like that's good talk, but let's see you do something.
Yeah.
Um,
And the other thing is Iraqi elections going on. I mean, they're meant to, I think,
I think it's a mess from what I've heard.
yeah, 44% turnout or whatever,
Yeah,
and it was all, I mean, the country's still in a bit of a mess, basically, so organising anything where you get everybody out to vote is pretty difficult, but 44%, but still that's enough, and Western democracy, that's enough to have a result, So,
it looks like it'll be the incumbent guy.
don't know.
I've heard that the polls say it's going to take 2 days to
Abadi,
count. It won't be announced till tomorrow, but Obadi apparently is
right.
leading.
We'll see.
But it's also messy in that there are 87 parties and
Right,
7,000 candidates,
right.
and not enough polling stations, and the security curfews because there's a risk of car bomb attacks threatened by ISIS and whatever nut jobs still are roaming around Iraq. Iraq is still, I mean, it's 15 years. It's still, I feel for
A
Libya
mess.
when I think it's going to take another 10 years to calm down enough to have an election.
Right. Thanks, America. Yeah, that's the world we live in. Anyway, anything else we wanted to cover?
That's good for me.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we hope you enjoyed watching us. Not that we were necessarily very entertaining. Maybe next week we'll do a song and dance or something. Maybe halfway through, a bit of an intermission. Uh, but we hope you like the video. We're gonna play around with it some more, and maybe we'll do some live streaming maybe to YouTube as well, just so we can have it uploaded there as well. But we'll see how it goes. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. So thanks to our listeners, thanks to our chatters. We hope you, like I said, enjoyed the show. We'll be back next week with another one. Until then, have a good evening.
See you next week. Bye.